this is the need for more local journalism now. I'm very happy to be hosting this event on behalf of the journalism program here at St. John's University. And we're joined by three wonderful panelists from different aspects of the news coverage business. Assemblyman, I'm going to include you in that because of what you're proposing to do in New Jersey. So we are first joined by Joshua Schneps, who's the CEO and co-publisher of Schneps Media, and we'll be talking about what that means in a few minutes. Joy Brown, who is an associate editor and columnist for Newsday, a Long Island newspaper. Many of you know it, being from Long Island. And finally, Assemblyman Roy Fryman of New Jersey, who is making a proposal in that state to use public funds to help local journalism, and he'll be talking about that. So I want to start with you, Joy, and actually before I even start that, let me mention some things that I wanted to point out in my research. I will say this, that if you look at some statistics on local and newspaper publishing, it might seem a little bleak. The Pew Research study from June of 2021 revealed that from a high of maybe 40 or 45 million in daily circulation for newspapers in the United States, in 2020 it was now down to perhaps 10 million. Also in estimated advertising and circulation revenue, from again a high of perhaps as much as $40 billion in 2000, that number may be down to $5 billion. So again, those numbers and those statistics may indicate, boy, things are not looking good. But there are promising aspects that I found anyway, related to publishing, newspapers, and the news media in general, especially local news media. Again, another Pew Research study, this one from March of 2019 on local news dynamics, talked about the percentage of adults in the New York City area who say local news is very important in finding out about, and to be honest, the first two topics I think relate more to our all news radio stations, weather and traffic. Those are the two biggest items that people feel local news delivers. But after that, there's a high percentage of, again, respondents who talked about how local news delivers important information on crime, on the cost of things, on government and politics, on schools, on jobs and unemployment, on community activities, on arts and culture, on social life, meaning restaurants, clubs, and bars, and then finally on sports. And also in that same study, again, local news media performance was evaluated. 74% of the people, again, in the New York City area from March of 2019 talked about how local news reports the news accurately, covers news thoroughly, provides news they felt they can use, kept an eye on local political leaders, transparent in reporting, dealt fairly with all sides, and included people like themselves in the stories that they read. All of those percentages of the respondents were more than 50% in the positive. So with that laid out, again, Joy, I want to go back to you. And we live in a world of 24/7 cable news networks that cover many stories. Social media delivers news updates instantaneously to our phones, and the internet that offers access to news sources around the globe. So why do we need local journalism?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. The first thing I want to do is talk about how well we are positioned in terms of local news. There are two things you didn't mention that I thought you might have. One was ghost newspapers. That is publications that are a shadow of their former selves. I drove cross country with my son a couple years ago. It is astonishing how many great newspapers don't exist anymore. And the second thing you didn't talk about are news deserts. And maybe that's not of something that's interesting because we don't live in one. We don't live in one on Long Island because of the robust coverage, local coverage from Newsday, and from robust coverage from weeklies. We have some very, very good weeklies out here. And we don't live in one because people here value local news. And that's very, very important because the other thing you didn't mention that I thought you might is that in taking a look at two University of North Carolina studies, one of the things they found was that where there was no local news, taxes increased and there were more instances of corruption. In other words, that not having a watchdog had some ramifications in that in the local area. Now, as to your more immediate question, why is local news important? Local news is important and always been important. Local news at its best can hold a mirror up to a community. One of the things you mentioned were 24-hour news and everything else. That coverage tends to be about a quarter inch deep, even though it goes 24/7. When I talk to people and they speak to me about MSNBC and Fox and how terrible one or the other is, I point out that neither one of them are going to take a look at your town budget, and neither one of them are going to give you any indication as to who's for running for office in your municipality or what their records are. They do not do that. Joshua's group, our group, we do that. That is what our job is. So I hope that answers that question. I want to get to hear some of the other panelists as well. And
Great. Yeah,
thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you for being a part of this. So Josh, let me actually come to you. And Josh, you represent Schneps Media. You publish newspapers throughout New York City that highlight in their titles of the newspapers, the specific geographic areas that they serve. You also publish specialty newspapers that cover specific demographic and ethnic groups, and you publish magazines related to specific topics. You did that through publications that your company founded, and I know your mother's very much involved in that, and acquisitions that you have made. The publications are all distributed for free. What is your business model for success?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And it's great to see so many young faces on this call and young people that care about news, because I think that that's critically important. I think, the whole landscape has shifted in terms of how people digest news. And I think it's important for young people to understand that, seeing an image and seeing a headline is not reading a story. So many people comment on social media, and it's scary because you've realize that they're commenting that they haven't even read the lead to the story, let alone the full story. So, I think as people mature, it becomes more natural for them to care about local news, because I always say our reader is someone that either owns a home or has children in school, because they care for the community. Maybe they go to a local church, or a local religious institution. And, people say, well, I'll never pick up a newspaper. I said, well, listen, I guarantee you I could get you to pick up the paper. And it's very simple. Either I put your kid's picture in the paper, I put your picture in the paper, or I put in someone that you care about picture in the paper. And I think that's what, local news was started with, is really getting people to care about things that were impacting them, impacting their families, impacting themselves. And I think, Newsday in particular is a great example that you have to evolve with the time in terms of how people are digesting the news. People should realize, and I'm glad that the assembly members here, that print is still vital. For our business, you mentioned that we don't sell papers. We don't generate revenue through subscriptions much, if at all. We do have some mailed paid papers that people subscribe to, but by and large, most of our papers are free. So the model of charging online becomes very difficult for us, because it's difficult to charge for something when people can get it for free. And then that really creates an issue for a publisher. Why? Because if you want people to pay for it, then you really need to make sure that quality is very, very high. And what you'll find with smaller publishers, I think Newsday really is blessed with a deep-pocketed owner that cares for local news. And I think what a lot of media companies have to do now, which is quite scary, is that they actually have to invest in a business that potentially could be having declining revenues. Because what you need to do is get over that hump. You need to invest in enough quality content that you increase your readership, and then are able to figure out a monetization either through subscribers or through advertising based on the size of the audience, the quality of the audience, or I would say the passion of the audience. Because sometimes you don't need huge audiences, but if you have a small group that's passionate about food or a small group that's passionate about politics. You can figure out how to support that. But at the end of the day, whatever it is, I think we've gotten through the model of blogs, being the future. I think people have realized that quality news content is what will drive the future of the business, no matter what the monetization may be. But at the same time, it is very scary. So I think what we've tried to do is take every penny in the business and reinvest it. So in people, in technology, in diversification of our business, whether that means we're doing sports content now when we didn't, or hosting events, or building our email newsletter lists, or bringing on more editorial staff as a percentage of the company. So it's a very difficult thing to do. A, you need to be able to invest in the business. And B, you have to start to understand really well how to diversify, particularly digitally. So it's created a whole different landscape, both from a management, content, and staffing perspective of we have to be a digital first company. So those are major challenges for businesses that have been run by the same groups for a very long period of time, or people that care about the future, and I'm talking beyond 5 years, I would say the future of their business, because if they do care about the future of their business, then they have to invest in it and diversify. And I would say that a lot of businesses today, if they haven't already done that, are in deep trouble. And I think that there's a lot of media companies now that are owned by larger entities that don't care about anything beyond, monetizing the business for the next 3 to 5 years.
So you mentioned Assemblyman Roy Fryman, District 16 in New Jersey. For those of you who know New Jersey, that represents Mercer, Middlesex, Somerset, and Huntington counties, or parts of those counties. So you've introduced Bill 6048, and I'm not sure if that's the proper way to describe it, or 6048. And please tell us what it is that this bill aims to do.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this forum and the discussion. 6048, and just to let you know, it now, because we began a new session, it got reintroduced. It happens to be 541. It's an identical copy and paste bill. Candidly, it was designed to begin a conversation. That's what the purpose of this bill was. It was designed to elevate an issue and a concern. I did not have any grand delusion that this was going to solve a problem. And the problem that I'm talking about is the decline of journalism, the decline of news, and from that, it becomes a threat to our democracy. There is a reason why we have it in the First Amendment. There's a reason why it is protected. And if journalism declines and news and authentic news reporting declines, so does our democracy. And for years, I've been struggling, and I would challenge my friends. I said, where do you get the news? Where do you search for your news? And I would get the typical the cable and this, or some people would talk about Twitter. I said, you're not getting news, you're getting information, but you're not getting the news. And so that's what it is, this dependency, this reliance, this lack of independence of reporting, of scrutiny, that concerns me. And so this was just, I was actually traveling, visiting my daughter in Seattle, and I read an op-ed on this, here's an idea to be able to support it. So people say, well, are you pushing it? Are you pushing to get it done? The answer is no, because I know it's a little thin. I know that this proposal needs to be much more thoughtful than what I just threw out there, which was to give people tax credit that if they subscribe to a news outlet, local news, they can write that off on their taxes, to make sure that we're what you invest in, what you put your budget towards is a demonstration of your priorities. So I wanted to change that conversation, and that's what led us here today.
So let me just mention too that, and Josh hinted at this, There are proposals already in the New York State Senate, very similar to yours. There are also proposals in the United States Congress, which would provide tax credits for people who subscribe to newspapers, and also provide assistance to news organizations to help them defray the cost of hiring and keeping journalists on staff. And all of those bills are in consideration, as you mentioned, yours is. None have passed, but have been proposed. So let me just come back to you, Assemblyman. Why journalism, though? You mentioned seeing the op-ed, and you mentioned visiting your daughter and being in another place, and this actually sounds very much like you realize there are these news deserts that Joy mentioned just a few minutes ago in New Jersey. But why take the stand for journalism?
Well, just a couple of days ago, we have a perfect example of, if you look at what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. So you had Putin get on and broadcast to his entire country this misinformation of what's going on. Where's the scrutiny? Where's the challenge? I was angered by our previous president, who attacked those that are serving the media and working of trying to distribute the news, attacking their authenticity because they are asking a challenging question. There is supposed to be a natural tension between news reporting, journalists, and those in office. It's been since the dawn of our country. This, you have to have that. So that's why it concerns me when this information gets out and people are just not thinking and they're just accepting what they read. And here's another example. 2 weeks ago, when the issue with Ukraine started to heat up a bit, a friend of mine who lives in Florida sent me a text with a link, and it was about that in eastern Ukraine, that they were requiring Jewish people to register with the authorities. And it was a link to an actual article. Disturbing to me. I opened it up. It was from 2014. This is 8 years ago. And it's being saying, look, we have a problem that's happening right now. They're saying, does anyone read? Does anyone take a look at actually read what's going on here? That this is an issue that's been addressed. So people are just reading the headlines. They're running with it. And we know, and you all know, that those who write the articles don't write the headlines. And that's of concern.
Joy, if we could come back to the concept of covering the news, and now it's been mentioned a few times, people just reading headlines, not looking deeply into stories. Speak about how coverage has changed, how reporters maybe are covering things differently or the same to some degree, but the need for, again, more involvement by a structured news organization that people can believe in.
Well, let me go back for a second. We talked about newspapers, for example. What's been lost is not just the business model for, and I'm talking literally about newspapers now, but there was an ecosystem there, I should say. Newspapers would write stories that would be picked up by radio, that would be picked up by TV, right? Now it's kind of gone. That's gone. That's gone. So if you don't have deep reporting in the community, your local TV, if and we're lucky here, we have local TV as well, is not going to be getting to as many or any of those stories. In addition to that, we've also lost the old ecosystem of how reporters were trained. You started out in your weekly, in your community, then you went here, then you went there, then you went the other place. This system is gone. So Josh and his group, they do a really, really good job covering community, but to get reporters in there, they're going to be doing some of the training themselves because that old ecosystem is gone. As far as how do you cover a community, I think you cover it. There are two parts of it. The first part is you got to go out in there. I'm a great believer in that there are no stories in a newsroom. I'm a great believer in being out in community, talking to people, having constant contact with people, and also being available for people to call you up. If somebody calls me up, I'm going to try my darndest to get back and to sort of explain and see what I want to do. But then there's the other part of that, and Josh kind of hit on that a bit, which is when you get what you get, what way are you going to present it? And I think the challenge for us now is to present it in such a way that modern generations can take at least some of it in, right? So we don't inverted pyramid style, that may be good for, that's where you put, I don't even know, do your students know what inverted?
Yes, we still teach it.
All right, so you got
Just a little
inverted
bit.
pyramid style. Yeah, so that's gone out the window pretty much. What you want more is a narrative. But in addition to that, the way you write, at one point in time, writing was more stilted, more formal. Now it is conversational. And it's kind of interesting because some people trace that back to Sesame Street. Things were shorter, things were conversational. You're having a conversation with people. When I write, I used to have this theory when I was your student's age. When I went out for my first job, I used to call. I had this thing where if I had to sit through a boring meeting all night long, I called it revenge journalism. If I had to sit a 9-hour meeting, I wasn't, and be prepared to write something that nobody would read. I would spend my time there trying to find me something, anything that would be of interest to readers. And that made me very, very good at looking beyond what was right in front of me. At my first newspaper, they would send me out. You get sent out to things that are not very interesting, but are important. It taught me to get my revenge, as it were, at turning in something that would be worth the front page. And that sometimes would be hard. It would mean that I would have to talk to people or pick something up off of a chair. And I think I've sort of kept that. That's my revenge journalism thing from my young days. I've kind of kept it this way. I want to see what is it that I can introduce here that's interesting, that's contextual, that's authoritative, that's not going to be boring, it's going to be interesting, and that I can at least get people to get at least part of the way through.
I think that's great. That's my new motto. A great story is the best revenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Josh, talk about your interaction with your editorial staff. And you mentioned before in jest, put somebody's picture in the paper, put their name in the paper, and that will get them to buy it. But I'm a Queens resident. I pick up the Courier. I pick up the Times Ledger. Yeah. And, I'm reading those stories because I'm looking for what's happening in my community. The word community has come up already a few times. How do you approach with your editorial staff what it is that you want to focus on for your different newspapers?
Well, we're fortunate that we have editors. So we have editors that are for each of the regions. And we try to be different. I mean, I think one of the focuses for a lot of media companies, either, you have scale or you have a niche. And I think our niche is that we try to call ourselves the pothole newspaper, meaning no story is too small for us to cover. If there's a pothole on your street, we have to let people know about it so that the local city council member will do something about it. So I think, the editors are really the ones that are directing the reporters of kind of story ideas and what to write. We do have weekly meetings for the whole editorial team, and we brainstorm ideas. One of the stories that we did that I thought was interesting is all of these 15-minute delivery services that are popping up in New York City and how they potentially will impact the bodegas, or how these workers are being impacted. I don't know if many of you live in Queens or around St. John's, but blew my mind. There was that winter storm about 3-4 weeks ago where we had a foot of snow, and here are these guys driving around on mopeds in a foot of snow making deliveries. Well, who's protecting those drivers? So, sometimes it's what you see. And I would say that to any young person, it's like, just open your eyes and there's a good story in front of you. So sometimes it's just kind of communicating what you're seeing, because I'm a New York City resident. So I have young kids, and so I'm involved in the community just from that perspective. And I think a lot of times just seeing the news through the eyes of your readers. Um, from an initiative standpoint, we decided that we wanted to put our arms around politics for the 5 boroughs of New York City, because this past year, almost the entire city council turned over, and obviously there's a new mayor, a new governor, a lot going on politically. So we started a politics website, politicsny.com. And one of the initiatives I put out that we did was to make sure that we held debates for every single city council seat in New York City. And really what it was is saying, well, we want to do something that no one else is doing. Turned out that a lot of people were offering debates for the mayor, but these small local races, which are critical because you talk about something that impacts you and your neighborhood, a lot of people have to realize that that's, city government, that's the city council. Nobody else was doing debates. So, we utilized Zoom. We made it very effective, and we hosted about 60 debates. So, I would say that that's probably an example of, sometimes where we come with ideas and initiative. But in large part, I think what Joyce said was so interesting, and I agree so much because I actually said it, is you have to get out there, right? Because that story I was talking about, the 15-minute delivery, you have to be standing on a corner with blindfolders on in certain neighborhoods not to notice all these people wearing backpacks making deliveries. So it's really getting out into the neighborhood and talking to people, because by opening your eyes and opening your ears, I think that's the way you get the best stories, and especially developing relationships with people. I think what separates a amazing editor or reporter from someone that's average, that maybe has the same skill sets, is that they've developed relationships where people will reach out to them and share with them a story that becomes a big story, that is breaking news, that is something that you have that no one else has. So relationships, I think, are key in life and in business and certainly in journalism.
Assemblyman, I want to come back to you for a moment. The Swiss voters, Switzerland, the country, just had a referendum on public support for newspapers, and it was voted down. And part of the reason it was voted down, according to exit polling, was that Swiss voters felt the government supporting private industries like newspapers perhaps put an onus on the newspapers to not reveal the truth that we want journalists to reveal. So why should government, or why should the government use public funds to support private industries like journalism?
Well, I think that that is a valid question that was posed in the exit, of the concern of, if you are receiving financial benefit from government, are you hesitant to be critical of the finance? And I think that's worthy of discussion. I would say that the tax code of our state, locally and federally, inherently supports various different industries. And the most simplest one to identify is the fact that people could take a tax write-off for mortgages, says that we are encouraging real estate and for people to buy real estate by that behavior. The fact that we allow people to write off for certain charities and designated charities says that we're encouraging that behavior. So the tax code inherently encourages that. And there is financial support that goes towards renewable energy, for example, to get that up and going. We have a long history of trying to adjust and help where we think it's needed. The idea that people can, depending upon your income level, that you can write off tuition, isn't that basically encouraging education by that very nature? So it is incumbent upon us to take a step back and figure out what's the best utilization of our dollars. That said, your first point still holds true. Will there be hesitation? And maybe that's where it's not the direct support, but it's the indirect support that's a little bit more removed. So it's not going to the individual publishing and the newspapers themselves, but it's the individuals that then support journalism overall.
So Joy, let me come back to you. So Newsday is a daily. It's been around a long time. Gone through different owners. You cover also two, counties in New York State that are well populated, that are, it's a big geographic area. You have a lot of different communities, a lot of diverse communities. Um, how do you make it work that it's local and yet you're covering in effect a big area, and you have all these different little localities within the local of Nassau and Suffolk County?
Well, I always say that Long Island is a community of communities that when you put them together are larger. I think we're bigger than, we have populations bigger than 17 states. And Nassau and Suffolk are two totally different counties. And even within Suffolk County, you've got one town, Brookhaven, which is geographically bigger than the entire county of Nassau. It is a very, very long, wide, well, it's not that wide, it's kind of slender area where you can go out to the East End, where you have the very, very wealthy who are out there during the summer, along with fishermen trying to keep making a living out there, or more agrarian out there, all the way over to our border with Queens, where one of my favorite places in Elmont, there are a group of streets that are named after old New York newspapers, right near Belmont Racetrack. So how do you do it? We have a system where we have town reporters, and they're responsible for taking a look at what is going on within the towns and the villages and the hamlets, and there are an awful lot of them. In addition to that, we have reporters who take a look at both of the counties. In addition to that, we have reporters in Albany who see what the state is up to and how it is going to impact the county. The big one that just came up was affordable housing, where it was kind of interesting because people didn't hate the idea of affordable housing. What they hated was the idea of the state telling them, taking away their power to decide when and where and how to do affordable housing. So we did a bunch of stories on that, and we do still have people down in Washington to talk to our representatives down there. A couple of interesting things that are going to be coming up, and it's helpful to be able to have kind of a local perspective on this. We have more open congressional seats than we have in memory. It's a free for all. At the same time, with the way they redrew the districts, it is theoretically possible that of the 5 congressional districts that represent Long Island, only 3 representatives from those districts will actually live on Long Island, because the other ones go for. So and I know that the Republicans are gearing up to fight for every single one of those, and the Democrats are gearing up to fight for every single one of those. What does that mean in terms of policies? Joshua made the best point when he pointed out, city council races and stuff. These are the people who make the decisions as to what your block is going to look like, and what your schools are going to look like, and whether the halls are going to be cleaned. These are the people who make the most important decisions in your day-to-day life, and you have to have an infrastructure in place to kind of make sure that we get there. And just to a couple of points, the assemblyman, you asked the assemblyman about why journalism. We're the only constitutionally protected profession that there is. And there was a reason for that back in the day when you had, scurrilous sheets and people drawing up papers, and people had opinions on both sides and propaganda and the whole kit and caboodle. Yet our founders made the decision that you had to have an independent press, which is astonishing. And the second point that the assemblyman made is, how do you support? There are newspapers that have gone not for profit. So in theory, there would be a mechanism. You would be donating to a charity, as it were, if you got the designation. So, it's not, people have been thinking about this.
Let me continue with you now for a moment, Joy, about, where things are kind of going. The perspective from most people is that the actual print publication let's put it this way, is not as vibrant as it was before. I'm talking not about information or the content in it, but just the very fact that it's just not as much published material. Josh, I think, is the exception to this with the many newspapers that he is publishing. But you both have invested, and this is where I'm going, in a very vibrant online presence. Josh has QNS.com and, of course, Newsday.com. Talk for a moment, Joy, about what you have done, and then Josh, I want you to say, your comments on it, about what you both have done to make this a vibrant place for people to want to go to. And I know many of the things that you both have done, but I want you to speak about that, how you've been innovative, how you tried to maybe take different approaches to, a newspaper presenting the news when it's done online. Joy, please.
Well, first, I don't work for a newspaper. I work for Newsday Media Group, and that's very, very important. I haven't worked for a newspaper for years, right? So what is Newsday Media Group? Newsday Media Group is a lot of things. We publish Newsday, right? That's the newspaper. We publish an e-edition of Newsday. We have Newsday.com. We just carried the president's remarks on Ukraine live. We have something called Newsday Live, which you see behind me here. I'm sitting in my room where I've been doing webinars 2 and 3 times a week for 2 years now. In addition to that, I used to write a column. Then, I cover trials, but I don't write columns in trials. I write newsletters from trials. I write breaking, you're in the courtroom with me, the whole kit and caboodle. I've done that. I've done live broadcasts. That's not what I came up with, right? So I did live broadcasts, and we also have Newsday TV, which you're going to be hearing a lot more about over the next several months. So we have multiple ways to, I would say, interact with, communicate with, and get response from our audience, or I should say our audiences, because if you think about it, the people who are that we have people who love the newspaper. We have people who have never seen a newspaper in their lives, and the only way they're going to get it is here. And that's where everybody's going these days. We're all going to end up over here at some point in time. And I should also point out that the other thing I've done is last year, for the first time, Newsday hosted what we call town halls. It was not the normal debate format. What we did was we sent videographers out all across Long Island, and we solicited questions from Long Islanders that they wanted to ask their candidates for county executive and for district attorney. So when they came in, they didn't know what kind of questions they were going to get, but what they did know is that they were going to get them from Long Islanders. And that was kind of an interesting thing. I had one of the candidates say to me, that was actually in a campaign, there are things that we do and points that we want to make. It's kind of refreshing to hear what's on people's minds, which is an odd thing to say, but nonetheless, I thought that was something that was very, very interesting. And I thought that we know that was very, very successful.
Josh, how about the investment for a company? I see your newspapers everywhere. That's great. But how about the investment that you're making in the digital world? Josh, are you muted? Fix this here. As we speak about the future of the digital world, and I have to unmute to find you. Sorry. There. Should be there in a second. Okay.
Yep, thanks. Sorry, I wanted to mute myself to avoid background noise, but I couldn't unmute myself.
Very good.
I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to quality content. I mean, you're going to drive readership if you have quality content. There's other things that you need to invest in, and that's, training for people that are coming out of school as reporters to really how to best use social media, how to build their own brands. I mean, I'm a big believer that every reporter should be utilizing their own social media to promote their content, because a lot of reporters and editors have become brands unto themselves. And like I talked about, building relationships, I think building your own visibility, whether that's LinkedIn, I think in news, Twitter is, obviously a critical stream of information. And really, I think the mindset that we're trying to put into most of our reporters' thought process is that you work for a digital media company. Let the editors worry about the newspaper. We'll take care of that. What you have to focus on is writing for the website, which is, obviously quality, time sensitive, thinking about multimedia, thinking about what you're linking to. Maybe it's a story that you wrote on the subject prior, or one of your colleagues' stories, linking to organizations, pages that are mentioned. Obviously there's so many different ways in which you can make your story come alive or give people more information by utilizing basic tools. So I think a lot of it is training. A lot of it is just as you do it, you learn. And obviously we're dabbling more in podcasts and video. But at the end of the day, I think a good story is what really gets read. So it's really quality over everything else.
And how do you approach, again, as a business manager, the understanding that the future is in the digital space, meaning people getting information, as Joy just pointed out, on their phones, on their tablets, that the physical newspaper itself may not be around for the not foreseeable future, but for the long range future, simply because it's easy to just get it on another device. And how do you approach that, again, as a business manager of what you need to do?
Well, I think every business has to have a mission, and every good business communicates the mission well. So I think that's really, I can't say how long I've been promoting digital, but it's probably when I joined my mom in business 20 years ago. So I think, like everything else in life, there has to be repetition in terms of communication and training and mission. And I think by and large, most journalists love it, because getting the ability to see the impact of your story, I think, is one of the most rewarding things in journalism. And, the statistics, I'm a big believer that numbers don't lie. I was a finance investment banker before I started working for my mom. And, numbers don't lie in terms of stories, in terms of people reading them and sharing them. And I think it's quite rewarding to see people commenting, emailing, sharing on social, sharing on your own site, and seeing that spread, and then people obviously responding or change being made, which is the ultimate, positive thing if a story can implement positive change. And then just one thing on the tax. I mean, I have to mention this in terms of taxes. The Local Journalism Sustainability Act was part of the Build Back Better bill that did not pass. And in that bill was a few things. One was to be able to give readers tax credits to be able to subscribe. But I think the most valuable thing that was in there was, and I think is something that is a no-brainer, was that it gave a tax credit to the publisher for every reporter, editor that they had working. Because I can tell you, as a publisher, owner, operator, that that's not going to cost the city or the state anything. In fact, I think it's going to be a revenue driver, because there is no publisher or editor that has enough staff. And I think that if you gave a tax credit to every reporter or editor, by and large, the job creation in the industry will grow. And that will have obviously added benefits to it. But I think that every publisher, I mean, listen, I would love to be able to hire more reporters and more editors. Financially, I can't do it. It's a balancing act. So I think, there are many industries that receive tax credits, many. By a very large industry in New York City in particular, I think it's New York State actually, is the film industry. They're receiving huge tax credits to incentivize movies to be made here. New York City is known as the media capital of the world, so you would think that they would want to, be able to grow that industry, which means having more people write content. So I think, a basic tax credit for every person that's, working full time for a media outlet, and there can be conditions put on it, would be a major driver for the industry, because at the end of the day, the investment that any media company that wants to be in survival long term has to grow their newsroom.
Yeah, and just to point out on the federal proposal, I think the aim was that that money would go towards hiring. It wouldn't be like, okay, Josh, you want to buy yourself a new sofa for your office or something. It would be very specific towards not only the tax credit for subscribers, but also for your investment in personnel. And
Which I think honestly, there were three positions. One was tax credits for people to subscribe. A second was a tax credit for every reporter editor that you employ. The third was a tax credit for people that advertise with a local newspaper slash media company. But I think at the end of the day, the one that makes the most sense is the tax credit for the reporter or editor, because you want to spur job creation in this industry, which is what is most needed. I don't care if it's a newspaper, a website, a radio station, a TV broadcaster. At the end of the day, you need people that are going to be reporting the news, and you need more of them, because even though companies like ours and Newsday are going to survive and thrive, there are many that will not. I can tell you that there are many that they don't have the free cash flow to be able to say, I'm going to hire 2 more editors. I'm going to redesign my website. I'm going to build a social following. Those are things that take risk, investment and risk.
Troy, let me come back to you. You held up your smartphone. You said this is where everybody's going. But I tell my students in many of my classes, don't think of even your smartphone as just like another TV. TVs now are like, 50, 100 inches across, big screens, a lot of stuff that you can see. The phone is different. How do you approach, or how do you work with your reporters to have them understand that just because it's being sent out digitally, the device counts for something in terms of, because we have students listening and watching, the device counts for something to consider on how the distribution is made.
I'll tell you this. We have different configurations for how a story appears on an Apple phone, on an iMac computer, on a I got 2 phones, on an Android phone, and I'll call them non-Apple computers. They're all differently configured because what you don't want is a headline and an ad coming in. So there is thought in terms of what makes the best experience for the person who's reading on these things. The other thing, you mentioned these great big TVs. TVs are movies now. TVs are movie screens now, 1, and 2, you can cast anything, including, the e-edition of Newsday, from your telephone to your big TV, were you ever to be so inclined, and watch all of the links to the videos and anything else that's in there. I just think that this is where we are now. It's not just where we're going, it's where we are now. The other thing is that also creates a need, and I'm sure Josh can speak to this too. You want people to get beyond what's on that screen. He mentioned headlines but they didn't read the whole thing. You got to work really, really hard to make certain that people are going to get far enough into whatever it is that you're writing to kind of get what you want to do there. So it's not just a question of design, right? It's also a question of how you approach a story, how you write a story, what form that takes, what format that takes. So you can't see it all, but there's a lot that goes into the multiple ways that Josh, with all of those publications, and Newsday with all of the ways that it get information to and from its audience. There's a lot going on there.
Let me go back to some statistics because, Josh, you're right. The numbers don't lie. Again, I referenced that Pew Research study back in 2021, June of 2021, related to newspaper viability. And one of the positives that actually came out of that survey was unique visitors of newspaper websites. In 2014, the estimate was somewhere around 6 or 7 million. And now in the fourth quarter of 2020, that estimate is upwards of about 14 million. So people are interested in what is happening in the world. They're going to news websites, perhaps more than they're just going to the newsstand. Are there newsstands anywhere anymore? But they're going to the web in order to find out what's going on, and that unique visitor stops, that unique visitor views reflects that. Assemblyman,
Well,
oh, go ahead, Joy.
I just also wanted to point out, you're talking about different generations and how they get their information, right? There are generations that have never picked up a newspaper and never will pick up a newspaper, and they're not something in the future. They're something in the present. That's one thing. And the second thing you talked about, numbers don't lie. Uh, and I'm sure Josh sees this as well. I see metrics all the time. The minute if I do a webinar, I know immediately whether, I mean, and they're very specific metrics. They can tell me if someone logged on, whether they stayed with the entire program. They can even tell me if they pulled another web screen in front of the other screen. They can tell me all of that stuff. And based on that information, I know that I did a good job. I need to do better. I need to do this, that, and everything. So we get instant, that's new. Instant feedback on virtually anything that we do here. And the feedback is coming from our audience.
Great. Assemblyman, I know we're going to lose you in a minute. I just wanted to come to you for one last question, which a student brought up as well. What has been the response from your colleagues to your proposal for this tax credit? What have they said about it? What have you heard from other legislators?
I'd love to tell you that they all jumped up and said, hey, let's do this instantaneously, but I would be insincere if I said that. The reaction was more from the journalism and publishing community than it has been from the colleagues. I'm not sure it's a prioritization on their radar screen. They're working on, because it's not as glamorous to say, hey, we're going to do a tax credit, or we're going to help out journalism. And so I'm disappointed that I haven't had more resounding support. And by the way, I don't have anybody objecting to it, so I don't want to misconstrue that I'm getting pushback. It's just not, I would have hoped more of my colleagues would have said, wow, that's a great idea. We need to do something about that. This is an easy one. Let's do this. But right now, part of it had to do with the timing, because for those of you familiar with the cycle, New Jersey had our elections at the end of last year. Things time out, you have to get reintroduced. So there was the timing of the introduction of that lent it to, it was difficult to give it airspace.
Well, again, I know you have to go. Thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to hear about your proposal. Again, I'm a professor now, but a long-time journalist before that. And I think any support we can get from any place is a great thing for journalism. So thank you for
your time, and I look forward to continuing a conversation on this. I need help to build it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's just wrap up, Joy and Josh. Just looking over some questions from students. Several of them reference trust, and they ask, for instance, one, does the public trust local news more than major or national news channels? How do you instill, or how are you trying to instill the trust in your publications that readers can believe in? And Josh, we'll start with you.
Well, I think there's a difference between, commentary and news. And I think that most news sources that are brands that are reflective of quality are the ones that, that you can rely on. I think what's been kind of misconstrued is what is the difference between commentary and news. And some places have blurred the line to the point that people think news is being broadcast when in fact it's opinion. And I think that that's dangerous. But I think it makes local news sources all the more valuable, because they are reliable sources. And I don't think that the reflection of, certain outlets should be put across media. But even I tell my own children, like, you always have to think about what you're hearing or what you're reading or what you're seeing, because, you want to make sure that you look at all sides of stories as well. So I think, at the end of the day, you have to really be conscious of what's out there and of where you're getting your news.
Joy, to quote that great Nassau County philosopher, it's a matter of trust. That's Billy Joel's line. What about your thoughts?
I'll talk directly to the students on this. The only thing you got is your reputation out there. When you write a story that's good about something, local media, we're the ones who stay. We're the ones who come back. So I'm not going to write something where I'm talking about somebody who did something wrong. In fact, I'll tell you a story. I was at a Crest Hollow Country Club, and I'd written something about a town supervisor who had hidden money in a budget so that she could give some people a raise, right? And never, right before the election, never said she was going to give these big raises, nothing. But then when things were there, pull the money out, everybody gets a raise. Yay. And we've raised taxes, by the way, too. So I'm in this room and she's over there and I'm over here. And we start walking toward each other. There had to be hundreds of people in the room. And you can see the hush coming, right? Oh God, it's Joy and Angie. They're walking toward each other. We walked toward each other, gave each other a hug, and then started laughing. And then Angie's the supervisor's sister came over and says, she knows she was wrong. So you have to be able to handle things with authority. You have to understand that it's your reputation is all that you have. And part of that is understanding you're going to make mistakes. I hate to do them. I get upset for days after, but you're going to acknowledge those mistakes. You're going to correct those mistakes. You're going to go back out there and you're going to do it over and over, not make the mistakes, but go out and report locally over and over and over and over again. That way you build trust. Right. And you're not the only person talking to other people out there. You've got your colleagues who are doing the same thing, whether they're covering education or covering sports. That's where you can get the twin things of you'll be able to write with authority and your sources and thereby your audience will find you trustworthy. They may disagree with you. That's a different kettle of fish. But they at least know that you're there, you're willing to hear everything, and you're reporting out what is in a community. And it's easy when things are great. It can be difficult when things are controversial and such. But you know that you got to. I believe you just walk straight in the middle there. And that's what it is. It really is a one by one, institution by institution. And in Joshua's case, publication by publication by publication, web that you have to build and maintain.
Well, that's a great point to segue to wrap up for our students. Is just any other advice from both of you about what they can do to get connected with local media, to get involved with local media. I will tell you this, Josh, you've been very supportive of our students and internships, and Joy, we've placed students at Newsday as well. But what advice might you both just give to the students listening and watching as they look forward to their futures, hopefully as very vibrant journalists? Joy?
I would tell you, find a mentor. That would be number one. Number two, I would find an organization where you can find a mentor. There are lots of different organizations. Number three, I would encourage you to, because you're going to want somebody who's going to push you, somebody who's going to hold your hand, somebody who's going to be honest with you about what you need to do and what you don't need to do, what you're doing well, what you're not doing so well, what next steps you can have. My first thing would be to find a mentor. The other thing is to realize that you're going to do a lot of different things. There's no such thing as a pure it's getting rarer and rarer to find a pure newspaper reporter anymore. You're going to be, I do TV now. If you told me that years ago, I'd have said, but yeah, I do. You can be doing a lot of different things. And I think that you can go ahead and make those moves now. But I think to me, a mentor is the most, or a series of mentors is the most important thing that you can do. The other thing is you need to know, and that's where you come in handy, Professor, where are the internships? You want to try to get out there. As I said, the traditional way of training journalists has changed. I know, for example, in the department, we bring interns in, and we tend to hire from the interns because we can train them ourselves a little bit more. So I think you play a role. I think they play a role. And the other thing is don't give up hope. Just hang with it. You got to stay with it.
Great. Josh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have mentors to this day that I lean on and call on for advice and consultation. And certainly, I think having a mentor is terrific. And then I do think that internships are critical because at your ages, you want to find out what you want to do, but you also want to figure out what you don't want to do. And I can tell you that I figured that out in both ways. One was doing a job that I didn't love in investment banking because I never had an internship doing it. And the other was, finding people that were mentors or finding things that I was and was not passionate about. So I think you can get as much out of any internship as you want. And I think that it is valuable to do it and to utilize your summer to find, a path towards what you think you want to be doing because you'll learn a lot either way.
And it just doesn't.
Can I jump back in here for a second?
Sure, of course.
Can I jump back in here for the other thing I would add in there is, encourage your professors to have you all visit newsrooms, visit places. I mean, I know there's a pandemic out there and nobody's really doing this much anymore. But, I visited my first newsroom when I was in high school and I walked in there. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. So I think you want to go see what you want to see it, feel it, see what's out there. See if you can't follow a reporter, a videographer, somebody else around for a day while you are a student. I think those can be helpful for you as well.
Thanks, Joy. That's a great reminder. And I think the pandemic has affected the opportunity to do that. But I think I've forgotten that is a great opportunity that we can do. So that's something to put on my plate. Well, look, I want to thank you both. Thank to the Assemblyman, too, who's left us. But you've been wonderful to be a part of this. I know for both of you, it's your passion, your vocation. So thank you for doing this. My thanks to the students who participated in this. We'll look to do it again, and we'll talk about another topic related to this very important business in our world, the business of doing good journalism. And just thanks everybody for being a part of this. Have a great day, a great weekend. And for students, have a great spring break. They're off next week.
Very nice. Thank you all.
Nice.
Michael,
Thank you.
Joy. Pleasure. Take care.
Bye, Joshua.
Bye.